Welcome to the Harmony Channel. We have a very special conversation for you today. Paul Shirley, former Iowa State University basketball player, longtime professional basketball player, cup of coffee with 3 or 4 different teams in the NBA. You've seen him on the Fearless Show, but beyond just basketball and 11 years as a pro, a successful college career, Paul is an interesting thinker, an interesting writer. He has more to say about the world than just sports, and he's written a book called The Art of Focused Work. And he's trying to take the lessons that he learned in the world of sports and teach you how to apply them to the rest of your life, to your business life, to your relationship life, just how to be focused and work. And he has a very interesting history that he walks you through in terms of we went from physical labor for about 12,000 years to now it's a lot of mental labor, and people haven't been trained how to tap into that. Paul, have I summarized or given a hint at what your book is about? Have I done that properly?
That's a pretty bang-up job. Although you called me interesting, so now I have to be interesting. So
yes,
that's a lot of pressure. That's the only downside.
That's a lot of pressure. So just so we can get the audience up to speed, let's walk through a little bit of your personal background and narrative. You grew up in a small town in Kansas.
Yeah, I'm from a small town, and we may get an appearance from the wife of the coach that got me to Iowa State in somewhat interesting circumstances, which I think apply here because I was a good basketball player, but I was not a highly sought-after basketball player growing up in this small town in Kansas. And Tim Floyd, who was at Iowa State, found out that I was available thanks to turn of events, but said, hey, we don't have any scholarships left, so too bad, maybe you should go actually to Southern Miss was his recommendation. He called a friend and said, hey, could this kid come to Southern Miss? They said, sure. But then my mother, in her infinite wisdom, did some research about Iowa State, where Tim Floyd was the coach, and found out that if you were a National Merit Scholar, which is what I was, you could go for free. So we called Tim Floyd back and said, hey, would you like to have a basketball player that won't cost you anything? And he said, why wouldn't I? So I went to Iowa State on an academic scholarship with one deal, which was that Tim Floyd could not tell anybody I was on an academic scholarship because I knew it would kind of screw things up with my fellow players if they thought this kid's just a nerd. I bring all that up because most of my life has been walking this line between the sort of the academic or intellectual side and the sports side. One of the interesting things about my lot in life right now, I spent so long trying to prove to people that I could play basketball, and I wasn't just a dorky kid who did well on the PSAT. Now I'm having to swing things back a little bit because it's hard for people to see that an athlete might have something to say about focused work, about creation, those kinds of things.
I saw in the early parts of your book, you talked about your high school, college, recruitment, and someone as smart as you and someone, it seems like your parents, you referenced it, they had a focus far more on academics than athletics?
That's accurate, but I do think my parents did a great job of introducing a breadth of activities to us as kids. So it was not only the spelling bee and the free throw contest, it was 4-H, it was Boy Scouts, it was square dancing when I was a kid, right? They sort of showed us that there were a bunch of ways into connection, into feeling like you could make progress, which is a lot of what I talk about now, this idea that it's not just about helping people get stuff done for the sake of getting stuff done, but so that they can feel a sense of purpose, so that they can connect to other people around this idea of accomplishment. There's a quote I love by this French dude who was a pilot and then a writer. His name's Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. He wrote once, there's no greater comradeship than through union in the same high effort, which is really what we saw. You played college football, I played college basketball and then professional basketball. There's something about that team attitude. I saw it in the studio today and yesterday where you've built a team. They're all united in working towards something that's difficult. I was talking to Luke on the way over here about the challenges of managing people in distant zones and all of that. And I think we all yearn for that sense of I'm doing something that matters, even if what we're doing isn't solving world hunger. We've decided that this matters to us. So the goal of the book and also the workspace I run in Denver is helping people demystify that. Like you mentioned, this kind of work is new to us. So it's giving people tools, reassuring them that it's okay that they're distracted, that they're struggling with the job of sitting down and writing a good email or building a PowerPoint, whatever it might be.
And so I want to press pause on that because we're going to get back to that, what you're doing now, purpose of the book. But I want to go back to understanding your upbringing a little bit, because you're 6'9", 6'10". Are your parents former athletes?
Not even a little. So my dad put himself through college using the GI Bill when it was in the Air Force, then worked nights at a railroad in Kansas City to finance his college degree, which ended up being a PhD in child psychology, of all things. My mom was a nurse. They had me actually in California, where my dad was doing postdoctorate work at Stanford. So I was born in Menlo Park, technically. Then they moved to small town Kansas, where they raised myself and 3 younger brothers. And
4 boys.
4 boys, all of whom played college basketball, which you divined was very new to my family. Like, we were not an athletic family. We hadn't thought about college sports or
Were
professional
your parents
sports.
tall?
My dad's 6'2", my mom's 5'10" or 11. I joke now with my mom, we were early to the sort of semi-organic free-range animals game, mostly out of necessity. So I never want to make it out like we were destitute, but we didn't have a ton of money, and my dad had always wanted to be a bit of a suburban farmer. So we raised cows, we had chickens, we had our own garden. So we were always like kind of attached to the food we were making. And now it's interesting how there is this movement toward getting back to that.
Yeah.
Like people eating the stuff that they grow. I think we did that in the 1980s well before it was cool. And in fact, in some cases, we were ashamed that we were raising our own chickens, eating our own eggs, like in the garden. Now I'm so grateful.
The shame of it.
Yeah.
We're self-sufficient.
Right. We're like real people who can actually take care of ourselves. But I think that you and I talked about this a little bit on your show. I think that's becoming a little bit more sought after. I think people want some of that sense of authenticity, that sense that they can take care of themselves. And that's heartening to me, because now that I look back, I'm so grateful for the way that I was brought up.
And so 4 boys, where are you on the chart? You the first?
I'm first. I'm the oldest. I'm also the tallest by a little bit. We go 6'9", 6'8", 6'8", 6'5".
And so your other brothers, what level of college basketball did they play?
So one played at Pittsburgh State. Do you remember that school in Kansas?
Of course, the Gorillas.
Yeah, exactly. The next one played at Colgate in upstate New York.
Gotcha.
And then the last...
That's D1.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then the last one played at Hutch in Kansas, so junior college. And then he went to St. Cloud State in Minnesota, and then finished at Rockhurst in Kansas City. So it was a huge part of our life growing up was going to basketball tournaments, like additionally going to baseball tournaments, but then also balancing in the spelling bee and keeping up your grades and reading and applying to schools because you thought you might go there academically, but you might go there for sports.
All right, so you're the firstborn, the oldest. This is where my whole question was leading. Your parents are kind of the academic, nerdy types.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like Dartmouth and Ivy League type schools are interested in you. Why the heck did you want to go to Iowa State? Not to denigrate Iowa State, but you're a national merit scholar. Your parents are more into probably education and athletics. Why did you want to go to Iowa State so bad?
I had this sense that there was something about basketball that I understood way better than other people. So I grew up playing baseball. I mean, I mentioned we played everything, we did everything, but baseball was really my first love. I could see, though, that there was something about basketball that just made more sense to me. I could make sense of the abstractness of it, that I could also then go outside, shoot baskets by myself. I didn't need a ton of other people to do it. And that when I got on the court, time kind of slowed down, and there was this peace that I found in that. And I think because my brain, like many of our brains, is pretty hyperactive, there was this sense of okayness in being on the court that I couldn't really find in baseball. I found it to some degree when I was pitching, but there was something about basketball that just got me present in almost an artistic way, right? So I think we forget sometimes that athletes and artists are often really similar. They may feel misunderstood by the world. They may feel kind of odd, and that sports or creative acts help them to make sense of that. That's how I felt as a teenager, just like kind of baffled by the world. I could find solace on the court. I also, maybe on a darker level, felt like if I get good at this, then people will like me, which is obviously a downfall at an eventual point. But there was that element of people tend to like basketball players and think they're cool. They don't necessarily say that about the spelling bee champion.
Got it. But I'm sitting there, if I'm your parents, not to second guess them, and hopefully if they're watching this, I mean no disrespect by this, but if I got this genius level son, national merit, I'm going to send him to Dartmouth and get the best education possible. You can be a cool basketball player at Dartmouth.
Yeah, that was a fight. So I got into Harvard, and my uncle had gone to Harvard.
You got it?
And he...
Well, you'd probably be a communist now if you went to Harvard. Anyway, go ahead.
He actively screamed at me on the telephone. He was, at the time, living in L.A. He was a cardiologist, chief of staff at Good Samaritan Hospital, which is where they took RFK Sr. when he was shot in the 1960s.
68.
Yeah, exactly. So he was very into the Harvard thing. He had gone to Harvard from Wichita, Kansas, and was very into the fact that he had gone to Harvard. I visited Harvard about basketball, but also got in there kind of just on my own merits. And he could not conceive of the fact that I would not go to Harvard. Right. Now, what I will say is that at those Ivy League schools, they didn't have athletic scholarships or academic scholarships. It was all need-based. So I remember I was probably closest to going to Dartmouth. It was going to cost my parents $17,000 a year for me to go to Dartmouth. And I was like, I don't really love Ivy League people, even back then. Mm-hmm. I would rather go to Iowa State and see if I can make my way of it in basketball. And if that doesn't work out, my degree's in engineering. I figured, like, I'll probably get a job. So it's not like I was all completely in on basketball. There was a sense that if this doesn't work, I'll go get a regular job. I will also mention when I got out of college, we had been really good at Iowa State. We went to the Elite Eight my junior year. We won the back-to-back Big 12 championships. So it was clear that I had a chance to probably go play, but it wasn't necessarily written in the sky. I applied to get an MBA at the University of Kansas in case I couldn't get in. And then even then, my mom was still like, are you sure you want to do this professional basketball thing? I think because at that point it was starting to feel a little crazy. But I would say that, like many of us who are athletes, who are musicians, who are writers, there's that feeling you have in your brain of there's something about this that just makes more sense. And I'm going to push this for a while and see where it goes.
And so you end up at Iowa State and you play with some great basketball players.
Some great ones. I mean, so not only the more obvious ones like Marcus Fizer and Jamal Tinsley, who were there toward the end of my career, but also Kelvin Cato, who went on to a long NBA career, was there when I was a freshman. Dedrick Willoughby, who was a great college basketball player. Lots of dudes who rolled in and out of there who were really good, which is thanks in large part to what Tim Floyd had built there following Johnny Orr at Iowa State. When Coach Floyd left Iowa State, there was a phone call because it was happening in the summertime. Nick Collison and Kirk Heinrich were both on that call because they had already committed to Iowa State. For those who don't know, these are two guys who ended up playing at Kansas. But they were
in the NBA for a long time.
Yeah, really great NBA players. But they had been so brought into the program that it was assumed they were going to be around, enough that when Tim Floyd called to tell us that he was leaving, they were on that call.
Nick Collison
and Kirk Heinrich, yeah. So, which was also kind of sad for me because I am fairly close with Nick, and I was like, oh, he's going to leave now, and sure enough, he did.
Yeah, those guys were great players for Roy Williams, and really that recruiting class of Heinrich and Collison, Roy was really souring on Kansas, and that kind of revitalized him.
So basically, Tim Floyd leaving Iowa State kept Roy Williams at Kansas
a little bit longer. He eventually left.
I will mention too, we talked about like why I would end up at Iowa State. One of the reasons is that I grew up in Kansas, wanted to go to Kansas my whole childhood, and then went to the University of Kansas to talk to Roy Williams in his office. about potentially going there. I thought the call had come, and now he wanted me to be there. And he,
hopefully, because I want to question you about that. In the book, he invites you to campus, or did you guys ask to meet with him?
Matt Doherty, you remember him?
Of course.
So Matt Doherty was the assistant coach with whom I'd had some contact. You know this, of course, but most people maybe don't understand the ins and outs of college recruitment back then. You would build relationships with assistant coaches because maybe they were sort of into you, but they weren't sure that you were going to come there. So then you would move on to the head coach if it got serious, but the assistants had the job of cultivating a bunch of the network, right? So we had been in touch with Matt Doherty, who was the assistant at Kansas. He was kind of my point man because they were sort of loosely interested in keeping tabs on me. So he called and said, hey, Roy wants to meet with you. Bring your parents and we'll talk about your future, maybe here at Kansas, maybe not. And so I went thinking, oh, this is it. I mean, that may have been misguided, but as you can imagine, small town kid in Kansas, this is my dream. I'd grown up watching Danny Manning and Greg Dreiling and Adonis Jordan, all of these guys. So we drove over, and in his office, I still, it almost defies belief that he would say to me, you're not good enough to play in the Big 12. You should go to Davidson, which is, he had a friend, Bob McKillop, who's a great guy. Super heartfelt and like just a really lovely human being. He was recruiting me at Davidson, and Kansas had sort of made that connection. I think they wanted me to go to Davidson and sort of do a favor to him. They also, though, didn't really like Tim Floyd, I think, at the time, because Roy Williams is a little full of shit. Like, he's a little bit of a, he gives you that.
I don't want you to stop what you're saying. I just want you to know who you're talking to. You're free to say whatever you want. Roy Williams is one of my favorite people I've ever met in the sports world. Continue. Say what you want.
So my impression of him was he's a little like, he does this down-home act, but he sharpened up real quick on, like, you are not going to be good enough to go here. You should go somewhere else. So I left the office thinking, well, I don't know that my decision's been made, but this is going to make it a little bit easier. So we called Coach Floyd and said, hey, could I still come to Iowa State? With this thought in my head of, I'm going to stick it to Kansas at a certain point. And as you know, that's maybe the central analogy of the book is me at Kansas playing for Iowa State as a junior. I need to make a free throw and then miss a free throw with 0.7 seconds left. And I liken that moment to what a lot of people are facing now with all of these distractions coming at them. So those people, those 16,000 people in the stands who don't want me to make that free throw are very similar to Meta and Amazon and Apple and everything else that's keeping us from focusing on the thing we want to accomplish.
All right, so just because I want to be gossipy and just it interests me, I'm going to dwell a little bit more on the Roy Williams deal and your perspective. Because, I read this story in the book, and I'm like, man, Roy Williams invited him to his office and
to break his heart.
To break his heart, and it just seemed. But now, as I'm listening, you tell it a tiny bit fuller. He's in his mind. Hey, let me place this guy in an environment where they'll really need him. Mm-hmm. He'll play earlier. He'll get more attention. Plus, I'm helping out my friend Bob McKillop. And because you said in the book, and you're saying that he's like, hey, look, we got guys coming in and we got guys here. You're not going to beat out. Mm-hmm. And so am I being, because I consider Roy a friend, because I like Roy, am I being too biased here?
I think Roy Williams was not thinking too hard about Paul Shirley's future, and that's totally understandable. He had a lot of other things to do. So because Beverly Floyd is sitting in this room with us, I will mention that there was a time that Tim Floyd, who I'm quite close with and who introduced us.
Obviously, I love Tim Floyd. Yeah.
Told me a story about Russell Westbrook being in his office when Coach Floyd was at USC, and Coach Floyd telling Russell Westbrook, you're not going to come here. You're not good enough for us, right? So all of these coaches make mistakes. It's not actually.
Hold it. Tim Floyd told Russell Westbrook, you're not good enough?
That's what Coach Floyd told me, and you can check this out.
He's never told me that story. He's told me a bunch of stories. Hasn't told me that one.
I don't think he would.
That's
I don't think he would
not in the win column.
Dispute that, because it's college coaches are making snap decisions about guys all the time. So it's not actually the point that Roy Williams was mean to me. It's that I internalized it as fuel for my fire, right? Which we all do. And I think it's, in fact, not necessarily worth perseverating on that now as a fully grown adult, but as a 18-year-old, I was very into that story of proving Roy Williams wrong, right? Now, we all go through these things. I think the part that helps with my story is just that a lot of people know who these people are. We've all had somebody tell us we're not good enough, and we've all probably told somebody they're not good enough to our own detriment, right? So it's actually not that Roy Williams went out of his way to make my life miserable. It's just that he had a lot of people to deal with. I found him to be a little callous to me at the time. I don't necessarily blame him. He's running a top 5 basketball
18-year-old
program.
Kansas boy, broke his heart. Here's Roy, the biggest icon in the state of Kansas. Because Kansas football stuck. Bill Snyder. It's a big deal. I'm going to relate it to, and I know this isn't the clear focus of your book, but I'm going to relate your story to what happened to me very early in my journalism career. And this is a woman and a person that I think was being very well-intentioned, but lit a fire under me that drove me early in my career. And I can't have any bitterness towards her, even though I didn't like the way it played out. And when I first got out of college, I just clearly wasn't qualified for a journalism job. I had played football and drank beer at Ball State. That's what I did. And
did you study journalism at Ball State?
Studied journalism, worked 1 year at the student newspaper, my last 5th and final year. And so, but at that time, again, this is late 1980s, early 1990s, everybody in the journalism, they're doing internships at major newspapers. That's how you got qualified. I just wasn't qualified and wasn't ready. My first job out of college was in Bloomington, Indiana for the Herald Times, making $5 an hour. I graduated from college and I'm making $5 an hour because that's all I could qualify for was part-time work. And my second job, and was the real job because the first one was part-time work, was at the Charlotte Observer. And they had these bureaus, and it was in Rock Hill, South Carolina, entry-level work. $400 a week is what I was getting paid. Yeah, $400 a week. But I went out there and interviewed, and they liked me, but they were like, Jay, this is rough. You're not really qualified even yet. And they were accurate. And they said, but come out here. They liked me so much, they was like, hey, come out here and let's do a 2-week trial. Let's look under the hood and to see what you're. And so I went and did the 2-week trial. And I crushed the 2-week trial. Everybody could see my work ethic. Everybody could see my commitment, blah, blah, blah. And then the woman, name's Trish Green, she brings me into her office, and the first thing she says to me is, you're an affirmative action hire. And it like hit me like Mike Tyson had punched me in the face. And I said, hey, I just did a 2-week trial. Y'all not doing me no favors here. Neither I'm good enough to get the job or, just send me back home. But this whole, you're an affirmative action, like you were doing me a favor, I'm just not with that. And I was an idiot and, really stubborn. And anybody that knows me knows that, I'm going to tell you what I think. And I told her that, and it stuck with me. She kind of stumbled and backed around and apologized and kind of made amends or whatever. But she kind of stuck to her narrative that I was kind of naive. And so that experience for the next I only worked there 14 months. And it's the greatest 14-month display of young journalism anyone's ever seen.
Yeah.
Because I'm working in a bureau, and you just don't get front page stories of the regular newspaper. I got like 6 front page stories on the front. And this stuff really mattered. It's almost like, scoring 30 points when it was hard to score 30 points in basketball, shot clock. But anyway, I say all that to say Trish Green had no ill intent. She's just saying what she thinks. She's just trying to, I don't know. She's not a bad person, but she did inspire me. And she did, kicked in my competitive fire and actually pushed me on to have a great journalism career. And so I'm more thankful towards her. And I guess that's why, and maybe it's out of defensiveness for Roy Williams, I'm just like, maybe you should be more thankful of Roy Williams than.
Well, I think I would be if he'd ever addressed it, because it wasn't like he didn't know where to find me, right? I played at Iowa State for the next 5 years. So I think there could have been an opportunity for him to come over and be like, hey, this worked out pretty well. Whatever it would have been, right? So I think you bring up a good point in terms of the long and winding road and how much luck, how many little just chances there are in all of this. Somebody was, I think we were talking about this at the studio, not you and I, but somebody else. The question of how do you end up in the NBA, right? It's an interesting question, because we like to think that it's all self-determined, that it's because of how hard we worked, because we're so diligent, we persevere. There have to, as you mentioned, be these breaks along the way, the people that come into your life. I will never forget my high school basketball coach who came to me after a game when I was a sophomore. We were bad. He said, if you keep doing this right, you have a chance to play college basketball, right? Nobody had ever even broached that subject with me. And in fact, he came to a book launch party of mine in Topeka, and I told him that story and thanked him. And he's like, I don't even remember that happened, right? So he did it. He was being kind and generous, but like we're saying, these things happen, but people don't necessarily remember them because they're not so impactful to them, but they are to us, right? When I was a freshman at Iowa State, there was a player named Kenny Pratt who was ineligible my freshman first semester. So I ended up getting to play more than I should have. We go to Iowa and win. I score a whopping 8 points, which is not bad as a freshman, right? To go into an unfriendly environment. Tim Floyd takes me aside and says, hey, stick with it. Kenny Pratt's going to come back and he's going to take your spot again, but there's something here I can tell, right? That built our relationship where I was willing to deal with him occasionally screaming at me or other coaches screaming at me, whatever it might be. You need these little breadcrumbs along the way that help you. I remember we talked about my time with the Lakers. When I got cut by Phil Jackson, I went to each coach and asked them, what do I need to work on so that I can be back here someday? Tex Winter said, I don't even think we should have cut you, right? Now, that was just a kind thing to say, but that little moment, that gets you maybe that makes you last another year through all of the trials and tribulations of playing in the CBA or going off to Greece. When I got cut by the Lakers, I flew to Athens, Greece, where I signed a contract for $100,000, which is amazing, except they only paid me $50,000 of it by the end of the year. I couldn't shower in the locker room because it was so filled with mold. Vandals broke out one of the windows in our gym. We had to wear stocking caps during practice. But maybe because Tex Winter said, hey, you've got a chance, I stuck with it to the next year where I went to training camp with the Atlanta Hawks and made it to the opening day cut. I get released. I go to Yakima, Washington, play in the CBA for $700 a week, similar to your journalism situation. I play well as a CBA basketball player, but I'm a long way from the NBA. Survive game after game after game, go home for Christmas. We're supposed to play in Bismarck, North Dakota, right after Christmas. I had gone to the coach destination for sure. I had gone to the coach and said, hey, I'm going to Kansas for Christmas. Can I just meet you guys in North Dakota? Because we're in Yakima, Washington, right? And he's like, we can't because we bought all the tickets, so you're going to have to fly back to Seattle and then fly with us to North Dakota all on Christmas Day, right? On the ride from my parents' house in Kansas to the Kansas City airport, which you know all too well, we get a flat tire. We pull off into a Casey's, and I'm thinking, maybe this is a sign, right? I'm not going to make my flight. Maybe I should just go home, start this life over. I'm 24. I could figure out something else to do with my life. And this man named John MacArthur, who was the father of one of my brother's friends, happens to pull up in his Suburban, happens to have a wrench on Christmas Day where we can change the tire quickly. I make it to the airport, and I get called up to the NBA 8 days after that, right? So if I say no, if I go home, I probably don't get called up to the NBA. I probably then don't, after that 10-day contract, go to Spain. The next year, go to training camp with the New Orleans Hornets, which is where now Tim Floyd is the coach. He has brought me in to basically get cut because he knows I won't make the team that year, but maybe the next year I will. I then play for the EA Sports All-Star team. I play for a minor league team in Kansas City. I get called up by the Chicago Bulls for a third of a season.
Kansas City for the ABA?
Yeah, the KC Knights.
Yeah, no, because it's just like that game you're talking about with Marcus Pfizer. I was at that game in the Allen Fieldhouse, and I covered some ABA,
I'm sure.
Kansas City Kings ABA. But anyway, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. So I go to the Chicago Bulls. I play for 8 days, get my kidney and spleen ruptured in a game in Indianapolis, your hometown. Spend that summer recuperating. Coach Floyd gets fired by the Hornets, even though he takes them to the playoffs. So going back to the Hornets is out of the picture. I end up going to training camp with the Phoenix Suns of Steve Nash. My life has changed because of the kidney spleen rupture. I'm thinking about life differently. I'm a much better basketball player. I make the Suns opening day roster. I get cut again, go to Russia, come home from Russia, not sure I want to keep playing basketball. The Suns make a trade. I end up back on the Suns. I write a blog for the Suns. I get a book deal because of that. So how could you possibly program that projection? You couldn't, right? It was all great people meeting me meeting some interesting souls along the way, sticking with it. Of course, there was a lot of persistence and diligence in there, but it really wasn't about something that I did other than to just be available to create systems so that I could continue to put myself into positions where I had a chance.
Yeah, I being available, and availability is the number one ability, but I think life is about handling adversity. How do you respond to adversity? And that's what I'm reading the beginning of your book. Is you handle the adversity. You were motivated, and you went out and you went to Iowa State, and you proved some things. You were motivated. You didn't just break down, quit, give up, develop some sort of insecurity or lack of confidence. And so I think that most people crumble in adversity and don't know how to handle it, and they tend to point the finger elsewhere rather than looking at themselves and improving. But anyway, I want to get to your book, and how much of your book is about handling adversity, or how much of it is about in what ways are you trying to teach people? And I think this isn't just focused at men. This is for men and women. How to focus in an era where we really don't have a lot of experience with the type of mental work we're doing now. Unpack a little bit of that, the history that maybe a lot of people just haven't thought about.
From a historical perspective, and this is one of the more interesting parts of writing this book, was getting the chance to look back and think about why this stuff is so difficult. So I see from people, I mentioned to you, I run this co-working space in Denver, but before that I ran a space in Los Angeles for 8 years, both of which have been dedicated to helping people get stuff done. And that's meant that I've just observed people working now for 12 years. And I've thought a lot about, why is this so hard? And I think a lot of it is because we're not really built for this kind of work, right? So as you mentioned, even pre-farming, for 100,000 years, we did hunting and gathering. So you and I would go out and try to kill the mammoth, right? And we would come back and we either did it or we didn't. And that makes sense to our brains. You either have the mammoth or you don't. Then you mentioned 12,000 years ago, we adopt agriculture. That also makes sense to our brains. We go out and plow the field, we plant the seed, we reap the harvest. That's pretty logical. We can go out and do it for 8 hours, go home, go to sleep, be done. Then came the Industrial Revolution, which is similar. We would make tires at Goodyear or pack chips at Frito-Lay, which are two factories in Topeka, which is why I bring them up. And that also was fairly straightforward. Then about 60 years ago, the economy changes from rewarding, especially in the U.S., this idea of a process, so doing the same thing over time, to more project-based work. So people are given the job. My dad worked for the Kansas Department of Corrections doing research on prison population. So now he's given the task of, we need to report on the number of prisoners in Lansing, Kansas, year over year. Well, how do you do that? How do you know when that's done? How do you do it well? How do you break that into bits? And what I've seen is that people, because they're so now shattered by all of this information that's coming at them, they have a hard time doing that. Even though it may only require 20 minutes a day for a while, it's hard to do that 20 minutes because it seems so intimidating, which I liken back to in basketball or in working out. You mentioned today that you were on the Stairmaster for 35 minutes, right? If I said to you, do that for 8 hours, you'd be like, that's insane. I can't do that, right? In the same way that you build your body slowly over time in little pieces, you do that in sports, but now you also do this in the world of knowledge work, which is all of this cognitive labor that people are trying to accomplish, where if I can get you to do 20 minutes on that PowerPoint for 8 days, that's far more effective than you trying to do all of it in one day in a period of 4 hours. And it also builds your ability to concentrate over time. Does that make sense?
It does. So where my mind went, to be honest with you, and I may move way too far out, but it is like all of this cognitive work. How many people can do it? And like, is their personality? Because, part of take me and my support of Donald Trump is because my parents were factory workers. My mom for Western Electric, AT&T for 32 years. My dad started out working for Chrysler and then eventually opened two bars that catered to factory workers. Mm-hmm. And that's the glory days for me. Mm-hmm. That's what when I make America great again, bring the manufacturing jobs back so that people that don't want to go to college have a way of providing for their family and have a way to move up the ladder. And, off my parents' back and the backs of the patrons of my dad's bar, I got to go to college or, I went on a football scholarship. But anyway, I got to be upwardly mobile. And so part of me listens to what you're saying. I'm like, man, the cognitive work, and can we get everybody? Because what'd you say, in the 1800s, 80% of people were farmers. Mm-hmm. And even in the 1900s, 40%. This trend towards cognitive work is probably going to leave a lot of people behind because it's just not in their personality.
And I think what we're seeing now, without trying to bring AI into the conversation, more trying to bring in automation into the conversation,
robots,
is that we will get rid of a fair number of these kind of middle manager cognitive labor jobs. And that's actually an important question. And the reason that this book is not called The Art of Knowledge Work, because originally I was going to call it that, because I was thinking in terms of people doing cognitive labor. But as I thought about it, I was like, oh, you know what though, Paul? I think there's going to be a movement back to more hands-on labor. And so I would liken some of this to the fact that you need to be able to focus if you're fixing my sink, right? A lot of a plumber's job is driving around and making appointments, but they also do need to be able to just lock in and focus on this thing. And that doesn't really matter if it's fixing a sink or working on a PowerPoint presentation. So you've actually sneakily figured out one of the motivations for this title, which is I don't want it to just be for cognitive laborers or knowledge workers. I want it to also be for people who just need to lock in and focus, which we probably wouldn't even need to talk about, except that companies have figured out how to distract us at all times, whether we're trying to fix a sink or build that PowerPoint presentation. So I think it's timely in that a lot of people are fighting with this. I was talking to Mrs. Floyd before this about the preponderance of ADHD. So I get people all the time who come to the process, which is the space in Denver, and say, I have ADHD. And what I have come around to is if everybody has ADHD, then nobody has ADHD. We're just in a condition of distraction at all times. So it's not so much that people have ADHD, it's that our environment has given us the inability to concentrate. It distracts us.
I have a smartphone is what they're really
basically
saying.
Yeah. They're saying I participate I participate
Twitter.
In the current economy, so therefore I also have ADHD. Well, yeah, we all do, because we haven't built up almost an immunity to this stuff. I think with time, my book will be irrelevant because culture will give us back ways to put up guardrails around how to focus. That we will go to dinner and we'll say, let's just leave our phones in the car, or let's leave it at the coat check. We may at some point be like, let's install coat checks that are for phones so that people can actually connect to each other, which I think ties back to one thing I want to keep emphasizing, which is my goal is not to turn people into optimized productive robots. I want people to do stuff that matters to them. You mentioned this idea of resilience. I think all of this starts with your values. Resilience in a lot of ways comes because you care so much about what you're trying to accomplish. So why did I keep playing basketball even if your friend Roy Williams said I shouldn't, maybe? It was because I valued a sense of personal improvement. I loved feeling like I was getting better at something. I loved being on a team. I loved the high of making a crowd roar, even though that was at the time my high school crowd. So I was able to connect to those values. You could talk about how probably personal improvement is a pro-social value. Relying on the approval of others is not necessarily going to last you forever. So there's a debate about like which values you should connect to, but I don't think resilience happens unless you really value what you're doing. So like, as an example, what do you value about your job?
What do I value? My ability to talk with people and engage with people about my biblical values and how they enhance my life and could potentially enhance someone else's life.
So would it be fair to say that two of your values would be personal or interpersonal connection, and one would be spirituality?
Yeah, I feel like my purpose in life, particularly when you get over 50, is just to pass on wisdom.
Sure.
That's the most valuable thing. Hey, I made this mistake. Don't you make it. Here's why. And if you do it this way, blah, blah, blah. And I see a culture that's hostile to wisdom. We're trying to eliminate it with these smartphones and with these social media apps. And, hey, you don't have to think at all. Google can tell you everything. And so, I like the ability to impart wisdom. It gives my life purpose, makes me feel like I'm honoring God. It makes me feel like I'm doing something valuable.
And that will keep you doing the show, that will keep you doing this podcast, even when it doesn't go well, right?
Yes.
So I think that's one thing I see in the world right now is a detachment from people's values when it comes to their job. So I think it's important to note that those values don't have to be high-minded all the time. They could just be, I got to put food on the table, or I like the people that I work with. I noticed that the people you've brought into the fold at the studio all generally like each other, right? And there's value in just showing up for those people, that they're counting on you, that they know that they can believe that you'll be there. I think we get a little wrapped up in thinking like, I got to solve world hunger. And in fact, one of the problems with our phones and with social media in general is that it gives us this delusion of grandeur that I've been subject to myself, where after basketball and as I got into writing, I thought, well, my purpose or my why is I want to help people. And that is still true, but I've kind of had to modify that to, I want to help the people who want to be helped. I can't help everybody. It's too much. It's not really possible. And it will always leave me feeling unsettled because there are people out there who don't care about what I'm talking about or who aren't ready, in the same way that I'm sure that that's true for you, where there are people you meet who are not ready for those conversations you want to have. There's a book I love called The Second Mountain by David Brooks. Do you know that book by chance?
I don't. I would know who David Brooks is, but I don't know the book.
So this book, the point was along the lines of what you're saying, which is we all have a first mountain that's very ego-based. My first mountain was basketball. I don't know what your first mountain was. Maybe it was football. Maybe it was your early journalism days. We do that first mountain because we think, if I'm famous, people will love me. If I'm famous, I will get money. If I'm famous, I will get girls, whatever it is. We are inevitably betrayed by that because it does not actually make us happy, even if we achieve it. We go into this metaphorical valley, and then we realize that our second mountain is helping others. It's imparting wisdom, like you said. And I love being around people who have gotten to that second mountain. And some people get to it really young, by the way. I was kind of slow getting there because I was an egomaniac, I think. And I was driven by fear of failure and kind of chasing things as opposed to being more centered in who I actually am. I think that you're right on. If we can connect to that second mountain value of helping, like I said, the people who want to be helped, then the world just goes around a little better. I got a couple of thoughts off of what you said, but
a big part of the reason I chose journalism and sports writing was I can remember saying to myself in college, man, I'm never going to work. I'm just going to go to sports events and write about them. That won't be work. I love sports. I love following sports. That won't be work. And so I'll have fun. And that's what's a big part of what keeps me going is, I get to wake up today and talk about sports, impart wisdom. The other thing that's happened that I figured out as I've gotten older is that the pursuit of happiness is the dumbest thing that's ever been cooked up. That
Absolutely.
We're not here to pursue happiness. Happiness is very fleeting. I'd probably get up and drive to Wendy's right now and get a double cheeseburger. That would make me happy.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't make me healthy. And so I'm more into promoting a pursuit of holiness. That's what I think our purpose is. And that is more attainable and more sustainable and more healthy than a pursuit of happiness. And most people, the whole world is built around, or the whole culture is built around happy, happy, happy. And that's how you end up with people saying, you know what would make me happy? Yeah, I know I got a bat and balls. I know that I'm a man, but what would make me happy is being a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like,
well, yes, you're exactly right. And I will build on that by saying, if people want to really break this down, it could be said that right now we live in a pursuit of dopamine and serotonin, and that our phones and much of American culture right now, I don't mean music, but the way we live is oriented around delivering those little hits of dopamine and serotonin that kind of give you the illusion of happiness, right? It's not real. I think I totally agree that pursuing happiness is a fool's errand, and that the way I talk about it is pursuing meaning, fulfillment, that those things are hard, but that they also provide us with these little bursts of dopamine along the way, right? So it's not like we want people to sign up for the gulag, right? We want to remind them that there are ways to find these little hits along the way as you are also pursuing something meaningful. And that right now we're trying to shortcut that in the same way that like drugs or sugar sort of shortcuts that stuff. We are delivering ourselves these little bursts of, quote, happiness. And I'm just as guilty as anybody, right? When we get done here, I will probably check my phone and see, did somebody text me, right? Did somebody say something funny? Is there something on Instagram that will make me happy? I think we're just at the start of curing of ourselves of this. It's going to be a while.
And so taking it all the way back to your book, what are you hoping this book, it's part of the cure. What are you hoping they read the book, it's about 160 pages. What do you want them to feel or come away with or tell their friends about your book?
One of the things I loved about the space I built in LA, and when I say I mean we built this place, was that people would come in and they would be a little unsure of themselves, not really confident in what they were getting into or what they were going to get from me. And they would leave with this clear sense of relief of like, oh, I can do it effectively. So I started talking about one of the jobs of that space in LA was to demystify accomplishment, to make sure that people understood that they could also do it, which harkens back actually to my childhood in that because my parents had moved from California to small town Kansas, we didn't know anybody. And I always ran up against this, whether it was 4-H or Boy Scouts or basketball or baseball, this idea that the people in the know didn't really want to let you in. It was cliquish, it was tribal, and there's nothing wrong with that. They weren't being overt about it. It's the natural human condition. But I always hated that feeling of people kind of making it hard to get in. So one of my goals with this book, the work that I do, is to demystify this and also remove some of the guilt and shame that people have about not being able to focus, about not being able to accomplish things, and remind them that they are up. I use this stat in the book. The American defense budget in 2024 was $850 billion. The combined revenue of Meta, Amazon, Apple, and Alphabet was $1.5 trillion. So for the year. So people are up against a budget that's double the size of the American military, which is the largest military in the history of the world, anytime they try to sit down and focus. And I think reminding people of that gives them this sense of like, oh, this is difficult. I'm not crazy. Because I see this a lot. People have so much guilt and shame around like, why can't I just sit down and write this email or start this poem or write this song or whatever it is, right? It could be something that's really important at their business. It could be something creative. I love being able to show people that it's okay that it's hard, and here are some steps that you can take. You don't need to be doing 4 hours of this. We need you to do 8 minutes of it, and that's going to be a great start, right? That you can get a lot done in 8 minutes, just like 8 minutes on the Stairmaster is way better than 0 minutes, right? Like it's great that you did 35, but 8 would still be pretty damn good compared to 0. What I see is that people say, if I don't have 3 hours to concentrate, then it's worthless. And my argument is often, no, it's more about let's do 12 minutes a day for 5 days, see how that goes. Next week, we maybe go 14 minutes a day, see how that goes. I worked with a guy recently, one-on-one, who runs a company that's big. And when we got him back to just being able to carve out 20 minutes a day to work on business development, sort of long-range plans for the company, he's like, it's been 5 years since I've been able to be productive instead of just reactive. Most people spend their whole days just reacting, just responding to emails, on Zoom calls, taking phone calls, and they never get that forward progress, which, connecting back to what you were talking about in terms of fulfillment, is what gives them that sense of forward momentum and that sense of meaning.
Paul, particularly here in Nashville, I can see a lot of songwriters saying, hey, man, I need to get Paul's book. I need to get to one of his workshops because writer's block. People like, and you're a writer as well, but these songwriters, they all talk about that. And that was one of the interesting things I found in the book where you were just talking about the importance. I think in the book you were mentioning like 15 minutes and 20 minutes and just think about, can I focus for those 15? Then take a break, come back and do it for 15, 20 minutes more, and you'd be shocked. I mean, that's the Jerry Seinfeld method of writing stand-up. He said, if I could spend an hour a day and come up with one new minute, right, then I should be able to basically write 6 new specials in a year, because a special is usually about an hour long. So he talks about that in his autobiography. Like, all I got to do is spend an hour and come up with a minute of deliverable material, right? And this is what you see over and over. There's a book I love called Daily Rituals by Mason Curry. He talks about all of the people we admire throughout history have come up with these rituals, whether it's Hemingway or Benjamin Franklin or Marie Curie, whatever it might be, ways to do a little bit at a time, day after day, whether they want to or not. And that's the hard part, right? That's the resilience piece that you mentioned, is that before I did your show this morning, I went to a coffee shop. I spent 30 minutes working on this novel that may be my next book or the book after that. Did I want to do that? Not really. But I got there. I didn't make a ton of progress, but I did something that keeps me connected to that. And I think that's where this resilience piece, that's where sports has a lot to tell us about dealing with failure, about picking yourself up after the play goes bad, the game goes bad, the season goes bad, and continuing to do it day after day. That's the hard part isn't necessarily just the ritual of the doing, it's the building of the ritual. Paul, I appreciate your visit. Glad to have you here in Nashville for a couple, 2 or 3 days. The best part of you visiting here is, I've been friends with Tim Floyd for a couple, 2 or 3 years now, and I got this great wife, Beverly, and I've never got to meet Beverly until you showed up.
Oh, amazing.
And I was going to crack this joke earlier, but when I think about Tim leaving Iowa State, just when Iowa State's getting Marcus Fizer and Jamal Tinsley, and he goes to coach the Bulls, and I know he made a lot of money, but that's a nightmare team he was coaching. And I started just thinking it through, and I was like, Tim's only made one good decision in his life. Beverly. And that's why he holds on. He doesn't want to bring her out around people too much because he knows someone's going to say, Beverly, were you blind when you met Tim? You must have been blind.
She had a lot of belief. He told me a story pretty recently about when he I think met your parents, maybe. And let me stumble my way through this. So Coach Floyd has always been worried about my financial success because I think that's how his brain works. And he sort of is like, what is your plan? Like, what are you doing? Which I appreciate. It comes from a place of love. Anyway, he was telling me about, I think, meeting your parents, your Beverly's parents, and them saying, like, how are you going to make money? And he's like, well, we're going to go to El Paso. I'm going to be a grad assistant, I think, and I'm going to make about $17,000 a year. And the way he tells it, he's like, yeah, I think they may have called her aside and said, are you sure about this? But I mean, Coach Floyd's a great example, and so are you, of there is this inner belief, and it harkens back to what I talked about of my early basketball days, of knowing there's something to this thing I'm doing, and not letting our phones, the people around us, distract us from that mission.
Paul, thank you so much. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time.